The lobby of the corporate office buzzed with energy as employees hurried past, their shoes clicking against the polished marble floor. The receptionist answered phone calls with a practiced smile, while the aroma of fresh coffee lingered from the nearby break room. Marcus sat quietly in his wheelchair near the entrance, his hands resting on the metal rims of his wheels. He had been here many times before, but today was different. Dressed in a simple, well-fitted suit, he carried an air of confidence, though his presence seemed to go unnoticed by most. He watched as a tall woman in a navy blue blazer walked toward him, her heels clicking with authority. Lisa Thompson, the HR manager, barely spared him a glance before stopping in front of the desk. She tapped her manicured nails against the counter, sighing impatiently. "Who let you in here?" she asked, her tone sharp and unwelcoming. Marcus met her gaze calmly. "I'm here for a meeting." Lisa crossed her arms, her expression unimpressed. "A meeting?" She looked him up and down, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the wheelchair. "We don't do walk-ins. If you're looking for a job, you need to go through the proper process. And we don't have any positions right now that would be suitable for you." Marcus remained silent for a moment, studying her. There was something almost rehearsed about the way she dismissed him, as if she had done it many times before. "I'm not here for a job," he said finally, keeping his tone even. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Then what do you want?" Before he could answer, another employee walked past, giving Marcus a small nod of acknowledgement. Lisa's eyes flickered with confusion, but she quickly shook it off. "I have an important meeting upstairs," Marcus said, adjusting his watch. Lisa scoffed, letting out a dry laugh. "Upstairs? With who? I don't think so. People at this level don't take meetings with just anyone." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "And what level would that be?" Lisa's voice carried a hint of irritation. "Look, I'm sure you're a nice guy, but this is a professional environment. We don't let just anyone stroll in here expecting to speak to executives." Marcus let her words settle for a moment. He had experienced people like Lisa before, those who judged based on appearances rather than ability. But he wasn't here to argue. He had business to take care of. Just then, a junior employee hurried over, glancing nervously at Lisa before turning to Marcus. "Sir, Mr. Reynolds just called. He said the boardroom is ready whenever you are." Lisa's face froze. "Mr. Reynolds," she repeated, her voice suddenly less certain. Marcus nodded, offering the employee a polite smile. "Thank you. I'll head up now." The receptionist, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange, quickly picked up the phone. "I'll have security escort you," she started, but the junior employee shook his head. "No need, he knows his way." Lisa stared, her confident stance faltering. Wait a minute. Who are you exactly?" she demanded. Marcus turned his full attention to her now, his expression unreadable. "You'll find out soon enough." The silence between them stretched, thick with an unspoken realization that Lisa had made a mistake she would soon regret. Lisa's mind raced as she watched Marcus wheel himself toward the elevators. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm, composed, completely unfazed by her attitude, that unsettled her. She glanced at the receptionist, who avoided her gaze, pretending to focus on her computer screen. The junior employee who had addressed Marcus with such respect had already walked away, leaving Lisa standing there, gripping the edge of the counter. She felt a rush of frustration. Who was this man? Why was he being given access to the boardroom? There was no way someone like him, a random guy in a wheelchair, could be important enough to be meeting with the company's top executives. It just didn't make sense. Determined to get answers, she pulled out her phone and quickly scrolled through her emails, checking the schedule for the day. But there was nothing, no mention of a guest, no meeting with someone named Marcus. That only fueled her suspicion. Maybe he was lying. Maybe he was trying to scam his way in. Lisa straightened her blazer and marched toward the elevators, pressing the button impatiently. As she waited, she replayed the interaction in her mind. The way he spoke, the way he looked at her, it was as if he had been testing her, judging her. The thought irritated her even more. The elevator doors slid open, and she stepped inside, pressing the button for the top floor. She'd folded her arms, tapping her foot as the numbers climbed. When the doors opened, she stepped into the sleek, modern hallway that led to the executive conference room. A few employees walked past, giving her polite nods, but no one questioned her presence. She hesitated when she reached the boardroom doors. Inside, muffled voices could be heard. Lisa took a slow breath, then pushed the doors open just enough to peek inside. The long conference table was surrounded by senior executives, men and women in tailored suits, their attention focused on Marcus, who sat at the head of the table, the CEO's seat. Lisa's stomach dropped. She scanned the faces around the table, searching for confusion or disbelief, expecting someone to question why this man was sitting there. But no one did. Instead, they listened intently as he spoke, nodding along. One of the board members, Mr. Reynolds, leaned forward, smiling. "Marcus, we're excited to hear your plans for the next quarter. Your leadership has already made a huge impact, and I think I speak for everyone when I say we're grateful for your vision." Lisa gripped the doorframe. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing, what she was hearing. Leadership, vision. What was going on? Then Marcus spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. But before we discuss the agenda, I'd like to address something that happened downstairs." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. The room fell silent. Marcus rested his hands on the table, his expression unreadable. "I had an interesting interaction with one of our employees this morning. Someone who judged me before knowing who I was." He paused, letting his words settle. "And I think that's something we need to talk about." A few executives exchanged glances, sensing the weight behind his words. Lisa felt her pulse quicken. She had made a terrible mistake. The weight of Marcus's words settled over the room, heavy and unshakable. Some of the executives shifted in their seats, while others remained still, their faces unreadable. Lisa, still standing just outside the boardroom doors, felt a cold pressure in her chest. She could barely breathe. Marcus let the silence linger for a few moments before continuing. "It's easy to talk about diversity and inclusion when it's written in policies or plastered on our website," he said, his tone calm but firm. "But what happens when those words are tested in real life? What happens when the very people we trust to represent this company fail to uphold the values we claim to stand for?" Lisa felt her throat go dry. He was talking about her. The executives looked at each other, sensing there was more to the story. Mr. Reynolds leaned forward slightly. "Marcus, are you saying you experienced discrimination in our own office?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, this morning, and it wasn't the first time I've seen it happen here." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "I was judged before I even had a chance to speak, dismissed without being given a second thought. And if it happened to me, the CEO, then I have to ask myself, how many others have experienced the same thing?" The room remained silent, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the doorframe. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to step forward and defend herself, to explain that it wasn't like that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But deep down, she knew there was no excuse. She had looked at Marcus and made a decision about him in an instant, without knowing who he was, without even considering the possibility that he was someone important. One of the other executives, a woman named Sarah Patel, adjusted her glasses and spoke carefully. "Marcus, this is deeply concerning. If this is happening in our office, then it means we have a serious issue to address." She glanced around the table. "We need to ensure that every employee is treated with respect, regardless of who they are." Lisa's stomach turned as she saw heads nodding in agreement. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Exactly. Because if people are making assumptions about someone based on appearances, then we have a culture problem. And culture starts at the top." His eyes flicked toward the door. For a split second, Lisa felt like he was looking right at her. She took a step back, panic rising in her chest. The door suddenly swung open wider, and another employee entered, setting a folder on the table. Lisa quickly turned, pretending to be walking by, but she knew she wasn't fooling anyone. She could feel the heat in her face, the prickle of sweat on the back of her neck. She had always prided herself on being professional, on knowing how to read people, on making smart decisions. But today, she had miscalculated in the worst possible way. As she walked back toward her office, her thoughts spiraled. What if she lost her job? What if Marcus decided to make an example of her? She had worked too hard to get to where she was, years of late nights, pushing through office politics, proving herself in meetings. But what if all of that didn't matter anymore? She closed the door to her office behind her and sat down at her desk, pressing her hands against her temples. She needed a plan. Damage control. Maybe if she spoke to Marcus privately, she could explain herself. Maybe she could find a way to fix this before it got worse. But deep down, a voice whispered that some mistakes couldn't be undone. Meanwhile, back in the boardroom, Marcus continued, "I don't want an apology. I don't want empty promises. I want action." He looked around at the faces in front of him. Because if we don't fix this now, it will cost us more than just our reputation. It will cost us good people. The executives nodded, some taking notes, others looking more serious than they had when the meeting started. The weight of change was in the air. And Lisa knew she was right in the middle of it. Lisa sat in her office, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. She kept replaying the scene in her head. Marcus, seated at the head of the table, calmly exposing the very thing she had been guilty of. She had walked into work that morning believing she was in control, that she understood how things worked. Now, she felt the ground beneath her slipping away. A knock on her door made her jolt. She quickly straightened her posture, forcing a neutral expression onto her face. "Come in," she said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her throat. The door opened, and Sarah Petal stepped inside. Lisa stiffened. Sarah was one of the most respected executives in the company, known for her sharp instincts and no-nonsense attitude. If she was here, it wasn't just for a casual chat. Lisa forced a smile. "Sarah, what can I do for you?" Sarah shut the door behind her and leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Lisa, we need to talk." Lisa nodded, feigning composure. "Of course. Is this about the meeting?" Sarah didn't return the polite act. "You know it is." She exhaled, studying Lisa for a moment before continuing. "Do you have any idea how bad this looks?" Lisa swallowed. "Sarah, Let me finish." Sarah's voice was firm, but not unkind. Marcus wasn't just making a point. He was making a statement. And if you think this is going to quietly go away, you're wrong. Lisa felt her pulse quicken. "I made a mistake," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "I know that." "A mistake?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Lisa, you saw a man in a wheelchair and dismissed him. You assumed he wasn't worth your time. And unfortunately for you, that man happens to be our CEO." Lisa felt a sharp pang in her chest. Hearing it said out loud made it worse. "You need to understand something," Sarah continued. "This company is changing. And Marcus isn't the kind of leader who lets things slide. He believes in action, which means there's a very real possibility that your time here is running out." Lisa's hands tightened into fists under the desk. She had worked too hard to lose everything over a single mistake. "Sarah, I didn't mean." "It doesn't matter what you meant," Sarah cut in. "It matters what you did." She paused, then sighed. "Look, I don't know if Marcus has already made up his mind about you, but if you want any chance of fixing this, you need to act fast." Lisa nodded slowly, her mind racing. "What do you suggest?" Sarah studied her for a moment, then pushed off the wall. "That's up to you. But if I were you, I wouldn't waste time trying to cover this up. Own it. Prove you can do better." With that, she turned and left, leaving Lisa alone with her thoughts. Lisa sat frozen for a long moment before finally standing up and heading toward the elevator. She didn't have a plan yet, but she knew one thing: she needed to talk to Marcus. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his office, gazing out the window. He had expected pushback in the meeting, but instead, he had been met with quiet understanding. That was a good sign. But Lisa, she was a different story. He knew her type. He had encountered people like her his entire career, those who saw only what they wanted to see. People who made snap judgments, not realizing how much damage they caused in the process. But what mattered now wasn't what she had done, it was what she would do next. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. He turned his wheelchair slightly. "Come in." The door opened, and Lisa stepped inside, her usual confidence noticeably absent. She looked nervous, uncertain. Marcus didn't say anything right away, waiting for her to speak first. She took a small breath. "Marcus, She hesitated, then forced herself to continue. "I owe you an apology." He watched her carefully. "For what?" Lisa blinked, clearly caught off guard. "For what happened earlier. For the way I spoke to you. It was wrong." Marcus nodded, but his expression remained unreadable. "And why was it wrong?" Lisa shifted uncomfortably. "Because I made an assumption. A bad one. I didn't treat you the way I should have." Marcus tapped his fingers against the armrest of his wheelchair. "And if I hadn't been the CEO, would you still feel like it was wrong?" Lisa opened her mouth, then hesitated. She had no good answer to that. And that silence told Marcus everything he needed to know. He sighed. "Lisa, do you know how many people have been turned away from opportunities because of people like you?" Lisa flinched, but he wasn't done. "You thought you were just brushing off a random guy who didn't belong here. But how many times have you done that before? How many people walked away from this company thinking they weren't good enough, when in reality, the problem wasn't them, it was the way they were treated?" Lisa looked down. "I don't know," she admitted. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "That's the problem." Silence filled the room. Lisa knew he had every right to be angry, every right to let her go. But he hadn't yet. That meant there was still a chance, however small, to make things right. She met his gaze. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "But I do want to change. I want to do better. And if there's anything I can do to fix this, I'm willing to do it." Marcus studied her for a long moment, considering her words. The decision he was about to make wouldn't just affect Lisa. It would set the tone for the entire company. And the choice wasn't as simple as it seemed. Marcus remained silent for a moment, his fingers tapping lightly against the armrest of his wheelchair. Lisa's words hung in the air between them, fragile yet desperate. He had seen regret before, empty apologies given just to escape consequences. But was that what this was? Or was there something real beneath her words? Before he could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. The tension in the room thickened. Marcus exchanged a glance with Lisa before calling out, "Come in." The door swung open, and Sarah Patel stepped inside, her face unusually tense. She held a folder in her hands, her grip tight. "Marcus, we have a problem." Lisa took a small step back, instinctively sensing this was bigger than just her. Marcus turned his chair slightly, his expression unreadable. "Go on." Sarah hesitated, then placed the folder on his desk. Someone leaked internal emails, HR communications, and not just any emails, ones that show a pattern of hiring discrimination. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Marcus slowly opened the folder and skimmed the contents. His jaw tightened. The pages detailed multiple instances where highly qualified candidates were overlooked for vague reasons. None of them stated outright, but the pattern was undeniable. People of color, disabled applicants, older workers, all dismissed without real consideration. "This isn't just a one-time mistake," Sarah continued, her voice lower now. "It's systemic, and if this gets out publicly, the company's entire reputation is on the line." Lisa felt her stomach twist. She had been so consumed with her own mistake that she hadn't considered what it might be a symptom of. Marcus set the folder down, exhaling slowly. Who leaked it? We don't know yet, Sarah admitted, but it's someone inside the company. It is already trying to trace it. Lisa felt a cold dread settle in her chest. If this was real, if this culture of bias had been happening at an institutional level, then Marcus's experience that morning was just the tip of the iceberg. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Then we don't have much time before this blows up. Sarah nodded. I'd say we have hours at best. Lisa's mind raced. If these emails were authentic, it meant she had been a part of a much bigger problem without even realizing it. She had dismissed Marcus, yes, but how many other employees had done the same to countless others? And now with this leak, the company wasn't just facing an internal reckoning. It was about to be publicly exposed. Marcus finally turned his attention back to Lisa, studying her carefully. You wanted to fix this. His voice was calm but firm. Then you'd better start now, because this isn't just about you anymore. Lisa swallowed hard. Whatever was coming next, she wasn't ready for it, but she knew there was no turning back. Marcus took a deep breath, closing the folder in front of him. The weight of what had just been uncovered was heavier than even he had expected. Lisa remained still, watching him closely, unsure of what would come next. Sarah stood near the desk, her expression unreadable. The clock was ticking, and everyone in the room knew it. Marcus finally spoke. We don't cover this up. We don't spin it. We fix it. His voice was firm, final. Every hiring decision in this company is about to come under review. And every executive, every manager, every person who played a role in this discrimination is going to answer for it. Lisa's chest tightened. She had been part of that system, knowingly or not. What do you need me to do? She asked, surprising even herself. Marcus turned his sharp gaze toward her. You tell the truth, he said, and you help clean up the mess you contributed to. Before Lisa could respond, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then looked up, her face pale. It's too late, she said. The emails just went public. A beat of silence passed. Then Marcus nodded, as if he had expected this. Then we face it head-on. Minutes later, the company was in chaos. Phones were ringing non-stop, emails flooding in. News outlets had already picked up the story. Employees whispered in the hallways, some furious, others afraid. Lisa sat in her office, staring at her reflection in the computer screen. She had spent years believing she was part of something good, something professional and fair. Now, she wasn't so sure. A company-wide meeting was called within the hour. Marcus sat at the head of the table, facing a crowd of executives, managers, and employees who all knew why they were there. The tension in the room was thick. Marcus didn't waste time. You've all seen the reports, he said. You know what's been exposed. He let his words sink in before continuing. This company has a problem, a deep one, and I won't allow it to continue. One of the executives, a man named Robert Kane, leaned forward. Marcus, let's be reasonable. This was an internal issue that should have been handled quietly. Now, it's out in the open. Do you realize how much damage control we'll have to do? Marcus's expression remained steady. The only damage that matters is the harm that's been done to the people we pushed away. Robert scoffed. That's easy for you to say now, but our investors. They'll be fine, Marcus cut in. What won't be fine is this company's integrity if we don't take action. Lisa found herself holding her breath. The Marcus she had dismissed in the lobby that morning wasn't just a powerful man in a wheelchair. He was a leader, one who wasn't afraid to tear down the walls that had been built over years of bias and discrimination. Then, just as the room began to settle, Marcus turned to Lisa. Tell them what happened this morning. Lisa's heart pounded. Every pair of eyes in the room was suddenly on her. She hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she knew there was no escaping it now. Taking a deep breath, she stood. This morning, she started, her voice steady but low, I saw Marcus in the lobby. I didn't recognize him. And I assumed, based on nothing but my own biases, that he didn't belong here. A murmur ran through the room. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others simply nodded, as if they had expected this. Lisa swallowed hard and continued. I dismissed him, treated him like he wasn't worth my time, because I thought I knew who he was just by looking at him. She turned to Marcus. I was wrong. Marcus met her gaze, giving nothing away. Lisa turned back to the room. And if I could do that to the CEO of this company, imagine how many others have been dismissed the same way. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, unexpectedly, Sarah spoke up. Lisa isn't the only one, she said, standing. We've all done it in one way or another, whether we realized it or not. And if we don't change now, we never will. Marcus nodded. Which is why starting today, everything changes. He turned toward the executives at the table. Every hiring policy, every review process, every employee who's been unfairly pushed aside, we're reopening those cases, and the people responsible for enabling this discrimination will be held accountable. Robert Kane shifted uncomfortably. That seems extreme. Marcus's eyes didn't waver. Not as extreme as the damage that's already been done. The weight of his words settled over the room. There was no arguing with him. This was happening. Then, just as everyone thought the meeting was wrapping up, a new voice spoke from the back of the room. I'm the one who leaked the emails. The room turned. A young woman, barely in her late 20s, stood near the door. Her badge read * Rachel Meyer, HR, Assistant *. Lisa's breath caught. The leak hadn't come from an outsider. It had come from within. Rachel stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. I saw what was happening. I tried to report it, but no one listened. So I took matters into my own hands. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Marcus did something unexpected. He smiled. You did the right thing. Rachel blinked. I thought I was going to be fired. Marcus shook his head. Not fired, promoted. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Marcus turned back to the group. The people who cover up discrimination don't belong in leadership. The people who expose it do. Lisa felt something shift inside her. A realization. She had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, believing success meant power. But in the end, real leadership wasn't about power. It was about doing what was right, even when it was hard. As the meeting ended and people filed out, Lisa remained still for a moment. Then quietly, she approached Marcus. I want to be part of the change, she said simply. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then prove it. Lisa nodded back, she would. Because for the first time, she understood what really mattered. As the meeting ended, Lisa lingered for a moment, watching as employees filtered out of the conference room. The weight of everything that had just unfolded sat heavy on her chest. She had never imagined that a single morning's mistake could unravel into something this massive, and yet it had. Marcus remained seated, his sharp gaze scanning the room, as if measuring how much work still needed to be done. Sarah stood nearby, speaking quietly with Rachel, who still seemed stunned by Marcus's unexpected praise. Lisa took a deep breath before approaching the CEO once again. Where do we start? She asked. Marcus turned to look at her, his expression calm but firm. By making sure this never happens again, he said. Real change isn't just an announcement in a meeting. It's in the way we hire, the way we treat people, the way we hold ourselves accountable. Lisa nodded, knowing he was right. It wasn't about empty apologies or damage control. It was about rebuilding trust, something that would take time, effort, and consistency. Over the next few weeks, the company underwent a complete transformation. Policies were rewritten from the ground up, hiring managers received intensive training, and a full review of past hiring decisions was conducted. Several executives who had played a role in the discriminatory practices were either demoted or let go. Robert Kane, who had resisted change the most, was among those who stepped down. Rachel, the HR assistant who had leaked the emails, was given a leading role in the department's restructuring. Instead of punishing her for exposing the truth, Marcus empowered her to ensure fairness moving forward. It was a shift no one had expected, but one that made all the difference. Lisa, for her part, did everything she could to prove she had changed. She attended every training session, volunteered to assist in the review process, and personally reached out to past candidates who had been wrongfully dismissed. Some were still bitter and unwilling to hear her out, but others appreciated the effort. One day, as Lisa walked through the office, she noticed something different. Employees who once seemed tense and unsure were beginning to relax. People from diverse backgrounds, who had previously felt sidelined, now had a voice in the company's future. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but the progress was undeniable. Marcus remained hands-on throughout the entire process. Despite his position, he made a point to personally meet with employees, listen to their concerns, and ensure that the promises made weren't just empty words. Lisa often found herself watching him, amazed at how effortlessly he commanded respect, not because of power, but because of his integrity. One afternoon, Lisa found herself in the elevator with Marcus. The doors closed, and for a brief moment, there was silence. Then she turned to him. "Can I ask you something?" He glanced at her. "Go ahead." "Why didn't you fire me?" she asked. It was a question that had been lingering in her mind for weeks. "After what I did that morning, I wouldn't have blamed you if you did." Marcus was quiet for a moment before replying. "Because firing you wouldn't have fixed anything," he said simply. "You weren't the disease. You were a symptom of a bigger problem, and if I fired everyone who made a mistake, we wouldn't have anyone left to fix things." Lisa nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "I won't let you regret it," she said. "I know," Marcus replied. As the elevator doors opened, Lisa stepped out feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She knew there was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was truly part of something meaningful. Months passed, and the company's transformation continued. The news cycle moved on, but internally, the changes remained. The office environment became more inclusive, and employees who once felt overlooked now had real opportunities to advance. The new hiring process resulted in a workforce that was more diverse and dynamic than ever before. Lisa's own career took an unexpected turn. No longer just focused on climbing the corporate ladder, she found herself mentoring younger employees, using her own experience as a lesson in growth and accountability. She still had moments of doubt, but she no longer ran from them. Instead, she faced them head-on, just as Marcus had taught her. As for Marcus, he remained exactly who he had always been, a leader who refused to let power change him. Despite the company's growth, he never stopped making time for the people who worked there. Employees often saw him in meetings, hallways, and even the cafeteria, always willing to listen, always ready to push for better. One evening, as Lisa packed up her things, she caught a glimpse of Marcus in his office. The lights were dim, and he was focused on his laptop, deep in thought. For a moment, she just watched him, thinking about how much had changed since that morning in the lobby. Then, as if sensing her presence, Marcus looked up. Their eyes met, and he gave her a small nod. Lisa nodded back, a silent understanding passing between them. Mistakes had been made, lessons had been learned, and in the end, the company and the people in it were better for it. Lisa walked out of the office that night knowing one thing for certain: real change wasn't about words, it was about actions. And as long as people were willing to do the work, there was always hope for a better future.